Okay, here we are at step 1. I've got the back of my dress and I've got my neck binding, which is this little rectangular piece. I'm going to fold that right sides together and I'm going to find the center of it. And then I'm going to lay that center down in the middle of the neck and then clip that in place. And then this is going to stretch over. This is why paying attention to the amount of stretch in your fabric is so important. Going to stretch over to the other corner. And then this side is going to stretch over here. And then I'm just going to put a couple more clips to hold this in place. Just easing it on to that back neck. This is the binding, which gives your back neckline a nice finished effect. So now we're going to sew this down at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I have my machine set to a narrow zigzag stitch, and it's at the between the 1.5 and the 2. And I'm just going to go ahead and stitch this down. Okay, so now we've done that. So there it is, stitched together. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to flip that to the inside. I'm just clipping that down. And then here we are, this is from the wrong side of the fabric. See how it's all folded under and clipped down? So now I'm going to sew that down. And I'm going to use a straight stitch at a longer stitch length. This is something I do to finish mine. The patterns, I think, have a slightly different direction. But you just want that neck seam to be stitched down. Okay, so now your back neck is finished. Yay! Alright, so now that we're here at the machine, I'm going to dial up my stitch length to 3.5, and we are going to address the bottom, which is where the gathering is for the back. Now, you can either gather it in the back, which is what I do, or you can do what the pattern tells you to do, which is actually do these small little pleats in the back. I find it very difficult, especially with an ITY fabric like this that's really drapey and stretchy, to do those pleats. So I'm just going to do 2 rows of gathering stitches very close to the end of the fabric. And this is just going to be where the pleat marks are on the pattern, which you should mark when you cut it out. And remember, because it's a gathering stitch, don't backstitch. Okay, so don't pull on those, just leave those as is. For now. That's all we're doing with the back. This is one of our fronts. The front has this cool V shape in the front, in the middle, which is going to be our facing. But what we need to do with those fronts is create the gathering that's going to shape the shoulders and the waist. So again, they want you to do pleats on the original pattern. and I just do 2 rows of gathering stitches. This dress has the notches for the pleats, and then there is another notch which is closest to this V-shape facing. That notch is very important not to get confused. So you only want to gather where the marks are for the pleats. So we're going to do that in the shoulders, and then there's pleats in the waist. So 2 sets of gathering stitches at a long stitch length. And then I'm going to do the bottom at the waist. And again, we're not gathering them up yet. We are just getting them in there. And remember, if you're following the tutorial, you're doing pleats instead right now, which is a perfectly valid option. And those of you who are more talented than I am at sewing knits are welcome to try to create pleats in a knit fabric. All right, so here we are. We're going to lay down the pattern pieces right side together. So lay them out flat on top of one another, right sides together. Okay, so we've got this all laid out. We've got this funny little V shape right here, and we've got this short seam right here. This is our center front seam. So we're going to be sewing that next. So I'm going to clip this in place. So to do this, we're going to sew at 1/4 inch up here, pivot, and then down here. So we're sewing this front V. This is the center front seam, and this is how we create our facing. So let's go back to the machine and do that. Okay, so here we are. So I'm going to start at the bottom hem at our center front seam. Get it oriented. Get that back stitch. When I come to this point, I'm going to get my needle in, pivot the fabric around, flat under the presser foot again, and then sew up. So when we open this out, we get this kind of weird little shape, and I'll show you what we do with it. So now we've got this open, and there's this little piece like this. So what we want to do, go to the back side of the work. I feel like I need to show you guys on the table. Okay, so here is our piece. We now have a center front seam. There it is. Woohoo! Okay, so let's flip it to the back of the work. Here's our center front seam, and here's this weird floppy facing. So we're just gonna pull the facing over like so. Lay it out nice and flat. Do you see how that makes a lovely finished facing? And what I like to do is I like to get some scissors. Unfortunately, I can't find my tiny scissors right now, so I have to use these big ones. But I get in there, and you see that point where you pivoted? I trim to, but not through that pivot point. Then you want to just bust open your seams. Depending on your fabric, an iron could help here. This fabric, I tested it earlier and it really does not iron well. So it's almost no benefit to ironing this fabric, sadly, which should get interesting soon. All right, so that's that. So we've now folded it over, and it's going to tell you kind of how it wants to fold over. So yeah, we've clipped it, we're folding it over. We've busted that center front seam. So it's as flat as we can make it. And then I'm going to stick a couple pins in. And this is a time when I don't use the wonder clips, I use a real pin. And then what you want to do is you want to stitch in the ditch in that center seam. So do you see from the front, that little center front seam? That's what you're going to be stitching into. So what I do to make sure that works is I lay it all flat on the back side, then I flip it to the front, and I make sure it's laying flat in the front. And then I put a pin from the front of the work and remove the back pin. Make sure everything's busted flat, and then I remove the other back pin. So that way it's nice and flat through here. All the seams are busted and laying flat. And then I am going to stitch down in the stitch line of the center front. So, okay, so we're going to go back to the straight stitch. We'll make it a little bit longer, like about a 2.5. I'm going to make sure everything is oriented to be as smooth as possible under the presser foot. Take out my first pin. Go really slowly, not pulling, but definitely holding all the layers apart. And I just stitch down the whole center front. And that gives a nice, clean effect to the front. Could have done some better pattern matching with this, but there you go. That's real life, y'all. All right, so now we have the front done and the facing for the front done. So what do we do next? Next, we need to deal with these shoulders. This is the trickiest part of the pattern, and it's really not that hard. All right, so we've got our back, and we're going to lay it down on top of the front. Make sure that your facing is folded in to start with. And we want to line up this back piece. What I like to do is I actually clip together the armhole right where it goes into the side seam. So the bottom of the armhole at the side seam. And I do this because it helps me orient the whole neck, shoulder area. All right, so that's done. So now we're going to just pull this up. So this has to match here. Shoulder seam at the armhole has to match there. And then we have all this extra length for the gathering. So what I like to do is go to the back of the work, the back of the front piece, the front bodice, and I'm just going to pull those 2 bobbin threads up and our 2 rows of gathering stitches to gather up the shoulder. Okay, now the back pattern piece lines up that second notch, the notch that is the closest to the facing. So I've got that put in there. Arrange your gathers so that that's what happens. And I'm going to put a clip there. I have all these loose gathering threads, and that's fine. I'm going to put a clip in the center where all the gathering sews to the back. Now, that's done. What do you do? What I like to do is then go and do the same thing on the other side, and then do the tricky bit. And it's not that tricky. So, lining it up, gathering the bobbin threads so that we have the nice gathers in the shoulder, making sure that our back neckline matches to that second notch closest to the facing, arranging the gathers, clipping that in place. Now flip it so the right side's facing. Here is our facing piece, right? The facing piece, and it's all folded down. So what you want to do is take that facing piece. So I can do this. This has an excellent tutorial in the pattern, so don't be afraid to go and look at that. So here is this. I am going to wrap. Here's the facing piece. See, it's not sewn down, but it's folded over in line with when we sewed it. So it's folded over. I am going to take that facing piece folded and wrap it to the back of the shirt, the dress. I know this seems weird. And I'm gonna make sure that all the layers are together, because there's a lot of layers here. There's the bodice front and back, there's that neck band for the back, the neck binding, and there's the double for the facing. So that's all done. I'm going to do the same on this other side. So the facing is folded over like it should be, and then it just wraps to the back and encases the whole shebang. So folded facing, wrap around, encase the back neckline. All right, so now we're going to sew at 1/4 of an inch across all these layers. I like to sew this from the back side so I can see that my wrapped around facing piece is nice and smooth, and that I'm catching all those layers of fabric. This is why a light to medium weight fabric is best for this dress, because this is a lot to go through. And see, my machine is not even sure it wants to do it. Okay. There we go. Okay, so that is the shoulder finished. So when we open it back out, what you'll see is the shoulder is all sewn and the facing is on the inside. So let's do the other side, and then I'll flip it all back around and we can see if we did it all right. Okay, so now you're going to want to flip it out and make sure nothing wonky has happened. If something wonky does happen, you can just tear it back and try it again. I've had to do that many times. So there we go. All right, so flipping it inside out. This is what we've got going on. We've got our facing, it's all finished on the inside. And then flipping to the outside, we've got a nice little finished V neck. All right, so now I've got that all done. we can go in and cut all our threads. Okay, so we are back. Here's my bodice laid out flat. Here is the front of the bodice right side up, back of the bodice right side up, and we need to address sleeves. Now, there are sleeve patterns that come with the pattern. There's also a fun sort of flouncy sleeve that I added a video for if you wanted to try that. I'll put a link to that down below. But what you want to do is lay down your sleeve. And actually, let's make sure that we've got the back going to the back and the right going to the front going to the front. So my sleeve gathers up a little bit because I added gathers to the sleeve cap and made it a flounce sleeve. So I have to deal with those in a moment. But for now, I'm going to just line up the ends of the sleeve to the side seam. Clip that in place. Now, with sleeve caps, they have a round, like, top part where your arm, the top of your shoulder cap. So we're going to deal with that in a second, but right now there's a flat part of the sleeve over here, and I'm just going to put a clip there, lining up the flat parts. I find this makes it a little bit easier to see how much I need to gather the center. So yeah, where the flat bit is, we're going to do that. Okay, so now I've got to just gather up the middle so that it fits into the bodice. It's exactly the same as when you did the gathering in the body. So I've got a little center front knot, little center notch, and I'm going to clip that to the shoulder seam where it meets. And then I'm going to put some more clips in to hold that gathered bit in place so everything is laid out and looks exactly the way I want it to before I start sewing. Okay, so now we're going to take this to the machine and you're going to sew whatever sleeve you're sewing at the regular seam allowance we've used for the whole dress. If you're doing the binding, you're going to sew that the same way and then follow the directions that the pattern gives you where you just fold it over and it will show you how to do it. But let's go and sew this. Okay, so just going to sew this down at that 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to be using a zigzag stitch at the 2 and the 2. Hi guys! So quick update, my sewing machine decided it hated sewing the ITY fabric, so I ended up using my serger to do the second seam, which is a good option. So now from the front, that's my waistband. I'm hoping I can press that down, but again with this weird fabric, I don't know if it's going to work. I've seen a lot of people make things out of ITY, make this dress out of ITY, but again, I think there's a little bit of a learning curve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew the basting stitch for the back the same way. And then I will sew the back bands like that, and I'll come back. So when you turn it out, it is all finished on both sides. So now I'm going to try to use a basting stitch on the back, and then I will sew the back with the serger for the second time. The back waistband. Oh boy. Alright, so let's see. Hopefully she is feeling better about this whole thing. I've never used this fabric type before. And I think my machine is just not sure about it. It's so slippery. It's also super duper stretchy. So we're just gonna go slow and make it work. Okay, so that sewed a little bit better, but I'm risking nothing. I'm going to go through and clip the back waistband, and then I'll sew it with the serger. Okay, let's sew her with the serger. And you know, this is my ninth time making this dress, and I still have some surprises. So I think that's something to remember in sewing. We're always learning. We're never 100% an expert. There's always something new to learn with a different fabric or whatever. Okay, I just tried to iron my waistbands, and yeah, you can't really iron this fabric. Thankfully, it did not melt, but that was a near thing. Okay, but I have gotten both waistbands sewn on. So now we are going to put right sides together. We finished all the hard stuff. This is just basic garment sewing now. So right sides together, I'm gonna match up those waistband pieces, the front and the back. Clip them. I'm going to put another clip at the waistband seam. Remember, you're going to go through all 4 layers. When you do this with a machine, so a regular sewing machine, which I'm not even attempting with this weird fabric, you're going to want to use a slightly longer stitch. So I would say more like the 2.5. And test, maybe fold up 4 layers of your fabric and make sure your sewing machine is ready for that. If your sewing machine is not ready for that, then keep playing with your stitch length until you find something that works. I'm matching up my little flutter sleeves. By the way, the flutter sleeves I am not hemming. I cut them out very neatly, and I'm not going to even risk a hem on my flutter sleeve in this fabric. I hope I love this dress when it's done, because I am regretting this fabric. Okay, match up the side with a clip or a pen. Do the same on side 2. If you're using something like a cotton lycra or a double brushed poly, you will find every step of this much simpler. Why have I done this to myself when I was trying to do a sew along? I have no idea. It's like, oh, I'm going to show you guys how to make the dress by making the hardest version I could possibly do for myself. All right, so now we're going to sew the side seams and the sleeve seam in one continuous seam. So let's get you over to the serger, which is what I'm using on this dress as much as possible going forward. So I'm starting at the sleeve, lining that up. This fabric is wiggly, so it's a little hard to get it under the presser foot properly. There we go. And then I'm going to sew down the whole side seam. Dress. Let's turn her the right way around and see what we got. We have a finished bodice. All right. At the skirt part of the dress. So we're going to lay down our A-line skirt pieces. I'm using the non-gathered one. Right sides to right sides. One thing I like to do, especially when it's heavy fabric like this that kind of like wants to slip around, is I use a clip right in the center of the skirt to kind of hold it. And then I can go to the side seams and clip or pin those. So let's just do that. We are going to go ahead and serge down both side seams. Okay, now we can attach the skirt to the top. And once we do that, all you have to do is hem the dress in your preferred method of hemming, and we're done. Pretty exciting. I've got my skirt, which is inside out. I've got my bodice. I am going to put my bodice inside my skirt so that they're right sides together. So I've got the right side of the skirt with the right side of the bodice. I'm going to match my side seams. Make sure that you've got the waistbands doubled. So you've got the 2 waistbands here and the 2 waistbands there, and that they're sitting flat. All right, so I've clipped that in place, and now I just want to clip it in the middle, making sure you're going through both waistbands and the skirt. There's going to be 3 layers of fabric. I would say if you're a beginner sewist or you want to just try the pattern and get used to the techniques in it, cotton lycra would be the #1 choice. And then my second choice for ease of sewing would be a brushed poly. And my maybe not the most fun sewing experience would be this ITY. But not all ITYs are created equal either. Some of them are more slippery than others. This one is very slippery. So once you've got all that clipped in, we're going to go to the serger and then just serge around. Okay, we are done. All you have to do now is hem the skirt in your desired way. I will likely not hem this skirt because this dress was terrible to deal with, fabric-wise. So I will trim all my little loose threads, and then I will go and get some video of me wearing the dress. So that is coming very soon. Okay, this is our finished dress. I hope that you guys enjoyed sewing your version. If you do make a Yasmine, please tag me in the comments with your Instagram, where you share it. On Instagram, tag it as Yasmine Dress Sew Along, and I'll be sure to see it. But this is my finished dress.